My name is Alara Vance, and I am 31 years old. For as long as I can remember, my world has been framed by the misty skies of Portland, Oregon, and the scent of cedar and sawdust that clung to my father's work shirts. For the past decade, my life has been a quiet rhythm set to the company's pulse, Vance Heritage Homes, the business my father, Arthur Vance, built with his own two hands and a heart full of conviction. In the landscape of my life, there was never a branching path, never a what if. There was only the singular, deeply rooted certainty that I would one day step into his role, tending to the legacy he had cultivated from the damp Oregon soil. My childhood memories are not of playgrounds and cartoons, but of the symphony of a construction site. The percussive beat of hammers, the high-pitched whine of a circular saw, the satisfying scrape of a trowel smoothing wet concrete, these were the sounds of my youth. They were the sounds of my father's love, a language spoken not in words, but in action. He wasn't a man of easy affection, but his pride was a tangible thing. I remember being a small girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing beside him in a half-finished house. The air was cool and smelled of pine and rain. He unrolled a set of blueprints across a makeshift plywood table, the paper crinkling with a sound like autumn leaves. "Look here, Ellie," he'd say, his finger tracing a line. "This is the load-bearing wall. It holds everything up. It has to be strong, straight, and true. Everything else depends on it." I didn't just learn to read blueprints, I learned to see the soul within them. I saw the future laughter in a family room, the quiet morning light that would spill into a breakfast nook, the sturdiness that would shelter a family through a winter storm. By the time I was a teenager, I was spending my summers in the small, wood-paneled office, my world shrinking to the orderly universe of invoices, material orders, and client files. Mrs. Gable, Dad's office manager since the beginning, would show me how to file contracts, her movements precise and her smile kind. "Your father sees the big picture," she once told me, her eyes twinkling over her reading glasses. "But you, Alara, you see the details that make the picture beautiful." Every compliment was a stepping stone. Every nod of approval from my father was a confirmation of my path. He'd ruffle my hair after a successful client meeting, a rare smile touching his lips. "That's my girl," he'd murmur, the words settling in my heart like warm stones. "Got a head for this business. Just like her old man." It was his way of saying, "This will be yours. You are the one who will carry this on." That unspoken promise became the compass of my life. My friends left for colleges across the country, their dreams painted in bright, bold colors. They wanted to be artists in New York, environmental lawyers in D.C., tech innovators in California. My dream was quieter, rooted in the familiar earth of home. I chose Oregon State for their construction engineering program, not because it was the most prestigious, but because it was the most practical. It was the straightest line back to Vance Heritage Homes. When I graduated, with honors and a handful of offers from large development firms in San Francisco and Seattle, I politely declined them all. The Monday after I received my diploma, I didn't take a celebratory trip or a week to breathe. I walked into my father's office, the same office I'd spent my summers in, and sat down in the empty project coordinator's chair. It felt less like starting a job and more like a homecoming. I didn't just join the company, I was absorbed by it, my identity woven into the very fabric of Vance Heritage Homes. I was the first to arrive, unlocking the door while the morning mist still clung to the windows, and the last to leave, the glow of my monitor the only light in the darkened office. During the frantic push to finish the Riverbend project, I slept on the old couch in the break room for 3 nights, a rolled-up jacket for a pillow, the smell of stale coffee my constant companion. I knew the name of every subcontractor, the birthdays of our major clients, the specific shade of white Mrs. Albright wanted for her kitchen cabinets. I was the one who painstakingly migrated our entire archive of paper files, decades of history, to a digital system, creating a streamlined database that saved us countless hours. I researched and implemented a project management software that reduced our completion timelines by 1/3. In the 6 years after my return, our revenue grew by 70%. My name wasn't on the sign out front, but my fingerprints were on everything inside. My personal life was a ghost, a series of polite declines and postponed dates. The two significant relationships I had both ended with a quiet, sad conversation that circled the same drain. "It's not that you don't care, Alara," my last boyfriend, Ben, had said, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. "It's that the company will always come first. I can't compete with a legacy." He was right. I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't a job I was choosing over him, it was a part of myself. I wasn't working for a paycheck or a title. I was working for the continuation of my father's dream, for the quiet promise that had been the bedrock of my life. My small apartment in the Hawthorne district was just a place to sleep and shower. The books on my shelves went unread, the yoga mat in the corner collected dust. Friends eventually stopped asking me to join them for weekend hikes to the gorge or evenings at a new brewery. My answer was always the same, a gentle apology. "I'm so sorry, I have to finalize the bid for the Bethany Ridge development." I missed my best friend's wedding on the Oregon coast because we were in the middle of a critical negotiation for a multi-home contract worth nearly $2 million. I sent a beautiful, expensive gift and a card filled with heartfelt regret, and I told myself it was a necessary sacrifice. I never felt forced. I chose this path with my eyes wide open, fueled by the unwavering belief that I was the one. I was the load-bearing wall, strong, straight, and true. My father had built that belief in me with his quiet glances, his gruff words of praise, and the steady, unspoken confidence he placed in me. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I proved my worth in every possible way, the day would come when he would place the keys to the company in my hand and say, "It's yours now, Ellie. Take care of it." But I had forgotten a simple, painful truth. In the quiet, complex landscape of a family, a promise you believe you've been given is not the same as a promise that has been made. I remember the exact moment the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed world. It was a Tuesday in early May. The sky outside was a classic Portland gray, a soft, drizzling rain tapping a gentle rhythm against the office windows. I had just finished a quarterly financial review with our accountant, the numbers orderly and encouraging, and was feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother, Helen. My heart gave a little lurch. She never called during the workday unless it was important. "Hi, Mom. Is everything okay?" I asked, a dozen worst-case scenarios already flashing through my mind. "Everything's fine, dear," she said, her voice unusually bright. "Wonderful, in fact. I have a surprise. Your sister is home." I froze, the pen in my hand hovering over a spreadsheet. "Lyra? She's here? In Portland? She flew in last night. Can you come for dinner tonight? I want us all to be together. It's been too long." Lyra. My sister. 2 years my senior, she was the vibrant, unpredictable comet to my steady, quiet star. She was the one who had always been spoken of with a mixture of pride and a kind of wistful longing. The golden child, the free spirit. She'd dropped out of art school in her final semester to chase the light in Tuscany with a camera, a decision that had broken my parents' hearts but also filled them with a secret, vicarious thrill. Her life was a postcard collection from far-flung places, a year painting in a sun-drenched studio in Lisbon, 6 months learning traditional weaving in Oaxaca, a whirlwind tour of Southeast Asia. She'd missed every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday for the better part of a decade. And now, without a word of warning, she was home. That evening, the air in my parents' house felt different, charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. The scent of my mom's rosemary roasted chicken, usually a source of deep comfort, felt unfamiliar. I sat at the familiar oak dining table, the same one where I'd done my homework as a child, and looked at my sister. Lyra was beautiful, effortlessly so. She wore a simple, flowing dress the color of seafoam, and her long, dark hair was tied in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She radiated a kind of calm, worldly confidence, as if she had seen everything and was fazed by nothing. Ellie, you look wonderful, she said, her smile warm and genuine. Dad never stops talking about you. The rock of the company. He says you're brilliant, that the clients adore you. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. Someone has to keep the lights on. Of course, she said, tilting her head. Her eyes, a shade of green so different from my own brown, sparkled. But I was thinking, maybe the company needs more than just light. Maybe it needs a little bit of magic. A new story. I didn't understand what she meant then. I filed it away as just another piece of Lyraisms, poetic, but impractical. I understood the following Monday. Dad called me into the small conference room, the one with the big window overlooking the rain-slicked street. Lyra was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs, a steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands. She looked as if she belonged there. Elara, my father began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for important announcements. I've made a decision. Lyra is going to be joining us. I've created a new role for her. She's going to be our creative vision lead. He beamed at her. She's going to help us redefine our brand. Update our image, our marketing materials, the way we present ourselves to the world. The market is changing, and it's time Vance Heritage Homes changed with it. I looked from my father's proud face to my sister's serene one. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes held a new kind of steel. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. For 10 years, I had been the one steering the company through changing markets, through recessions and booms. I had been the one evolving our processes, our systems, our client relationships. I was given tasks, and I executed them flawlessly. I was the load-bearing wall. But I was never introduced with a grand title and a speech about a new era. I was just there. The engine, humming quietly under the hood. That's great, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I'll let the team know to coordinate with her. Inside, something small but essential fractured. Within a month, the office was transformed. Lyra's magic was everywhere. Our classic, sturdy logo was replaced with a sleek, minimalist design. The company website, which I had painstakingly updated just 2 years prior, was overhauled with artistic, black and white photos of our projects and poetic captions about crafting dreams and building soul. Dad, who had once argued with me for a week about changing the font on our letterhead because the old one was perfectly fine, now praised Lyra's every move in our weekly staff meetings. Lyra has brought a breath of fresh air into this place, he'd announced to the team. He started referring to us as his perfect succession team, the structure and the spirit. The phrase was meant to be inclusive, but all it did was diminish the role I had believed was solely mine. Lyra would drift into the office around 10 in the morning, often leaving by 3 for what she called a creative excursion. She took long lunches with artists and designers. Her Instagram feed became a curated gallery of our work, interspersed with shots of her looking pensive in a half-finished building, a cup of artisanal coffee in hand. Captions read, #FamilyBusiness, #CreativeFlow, #BuildingTheFuture. I couldn't deny that her changes were having an effect. 2 of our recent spec homes, which she had staged with modern, artistic furniture and local art, received glowing articles in a regional design magazine. But the sting of it was sharp and constant. It was in the way my father would now turn to her first in meetings, asking, "Lyra, what's your vision for this?" It was in the subtle shift of gravity in the office, everything now orbiting her bright, shining star. I was still the one reviewing contracts until my eyes burned, negotiating with difficult suppliers, and solving the complex logistical puzzles that kept our projects on track. But my father's gaze, the one that had been my compass for so long, had begun to drift toward the newer, shinier thing. I felt like a vintage, well-made tool, still reliable and respected, but being slowly replaced by a sleeker, more modern model. I didn't complain. I just put my head down and worked harder, hoping my dedication would speak for itself. But at night, in the quiet of my apartment, I would find myself scrolling through old emails, rereading project reports, searching for something I couldn't name. I was looking for proof, for a sign that I hadn't imagined the promise. A seed of doubt had been planted, and in the fertile ground of my exhaustion and anxiety, it was beginning to grow. It wasn't just doubt in Lyra, but in the very foundation of the home, the family, and the legacy I had given my life to. I don't know what compelled me to stay late that Thursday evening. Perhaps it was a premonition, a quiet hum of unease that had been building for weeks. Or maybe it was simply the evasive look my father had given me earlier that day. I had asked him about the final signed contract for the Willow Creek Residences, a community of sustainable homes I had spent the better part of a year developing. It was my passion project, the culmination of everything I believed Vance Heritage Homes could be. "I've sent the original to the lawyers for a final review," he'd said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "You can find the scanned copy on the server." But there was no scanned copy on the server. And I knew my father. He had one golden rule, a rule he'd drilled into me since I was an intern: never let an original out of this office without a hard copy in the files. It was his mantra. So, after everyone else had gone home, leaving the office in a deep, humming silence, I went down to the basement archive room. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and time. Only Mrs. Gable and I knew the secrets of this room, which file cabinet drawer always stuck, which boxes were mislabeled from a long-ago move. I pulled open heavy metal drawers, the sound echoing in the stillness. My fingers, smudged with ink, flipped through folders, searching not just for the Willow Creek contract, but for an answer to a question I was afraid to ask. Then I saw it. Tucked away in a drawer labeled Archive Tax Records 2010 to 2015, was a slim, navy blue binder with no label on the spine. It was out of place, an anomaly in a system I knew intimately. My heart began to beat a little faster. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. The cover sheet was stark and official. Equity Transfer Agreement, Vance Heritage Homes. Dated June 1st. Less than 2 months ago. I opened the binder. The clinical, legal language swam before my eyes, but the words were cruelly clear. Transfer of 70%, of all shares held by Arthur Vance to Lyra Vance. Remaining 20%, to be retained by Arthur Vance. 10%, to be held by Helen Vance. I read it again. And again. My name was nowhere. Not a single share. Not a footnote. Not a mention of my decade of service, of my life's work. The room suddenly felt airless. The walls seemed to be closing in. I gripped a metal shelving unit to steady myself, my knuckles white. The cold from the metal seeped into my bones. The promise, the entire foundation of my life, had been a lie. It wasn't just that I wasn't the chosen one. In the legal reality of the company I had helped build, I didn't even exist. A soft footstep on the stairs broke the silence. Mrs. Gable stood in the doorway, a worried look on her face. "Ilara?" I saw the light on. "Is everything all right?" Her eyes fell to the binder in my hand, and a flicker of something, pity, guilt, crossed her features. "You knew," I whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing. "You knew about this." She let out a long, slow sigh and stepped into the room, gently closing the door behind her. "Your father was going to tell you, Ilara. When the time was right. He thought you would understand." "Understand?" The word ripped from my throat, louder than I intended. "Understand what?" "That he gave the company away to the sister who has been gone for 10 years? The one who has never poured a foundation or negotiated a lumber contract in her life?" Mrs. Gable's eyes filled with a deep, maternal sorrow that almost broke me. "This isn't about your work, dear. Your father, he thinks the company needs a new face, a new kind of energy to grow. He thinks you're too much like him. Too focused on the nuts and bolts. He believes Lyra's vision is what will take it to the next level. Too much like him." The words were a slap. For years, being like him was the highest praise. Now, it was my disqualification. I felt a sudden, cold clarity. I brushed past her, the binder clutched in my hand like a shield, and ran up the stairs. I don't remember the drive home through the rainy streets. I just remember pulling into my garage and sitting in the car for a long time, the engine off, the only sound the ticking of cooling metal and the drumming of rain on the roof. I collapsed into my favorite armchair, the one by the window overlooking the wet, shimmering leaves of the maple tree outside. The city lights began to blur through my tears. I replayed every memory, every word of praise, every proud smile from my father. They were all tainted now, reframed by the harsh light of this new reality. He hadn't been grooming a successor. He had been using a loyal, hard-working daughter to keep the ship steady until the real heir decided to come home. I held the binder, my first instinct to tear it to shreds, to destroy the evidence of my own foolishness. But I stopped. No. This quiet, brutal document wasn't just a record of my betrayal. It was a record of the truth. And as I sat there, a new thought began to form, not out of anger, but out of a profound, hollowed-out grief. If this company, this legacy, was no longer mine to inherit, then it was no longer mine to protect. If they had chosen Lyra to be the future, then she could bear the weight of it. I stood up, switched on a lamp, and opened my laptop. For the first time in a decade, it wasn't to work on a project for Vance Heritage Homes. It was to begin building something new, an exit. Sleep did not come that night. Each clause in the agreement was a thorn, twisting deeper with every passing hour. They had kept this from me for months. Every cheerful good morning, every meeting where I presented my work, every family dinner, it was all a charade. They had watched me pour my soul into a future they had already given to someone else. They had let me serve a dream that was no longer mine. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely light, as if a great weight had been lifted, leaving behind a vast and terrifying emptiness. I bypassed my usual wardrobe of sensible blouses and tailored trousers and pulled on a pair of old, soft jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. I wasn't going to the office. I didn't need to be Ilara of Vance Heritage Homes today. I just needed to be Ilara. I sent a simple text to my mother, "I'd like to come to dinner tonight. I need to talk to everyone." Her reply was instant, punctuated with a heart emoji. "Of course, sweetie. We'd love that. Dad and Lyra will be here. I'll make your favorite pasta." I arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. The familiar Craftsman house where I'd grown up, with its welcoming porch and blooming rose bushes, looked like a stranger's home. I walked in without knocking, my key still fitting the lock. The house was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of garlic and basil. Mom was humming in the kitchen, a glass of white wine on the counter. Dad was in his favorite armchair, reading the paper. Lyra was at the dining table, sketching in a leather-bound notebook, a picture of effortless creativity. "Ellie," my mother said, turning to embrace me. I stood stiffly in her arms, unable to return the hug. "Can we all sit down for a moment?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected, but firm. They all froze, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. My father lowered his paper. Lyra closed her sketchbook. I walked to the dining table and placed the navy blue binder in the center. I opened it to the signature page and slid it across the polished wood. I didn't say a word. I just waited. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle simmer of the sauce on the stove. Lyra's eyes widened as she read the document. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small, wounded sound escaping her lips. My father's face, usually a mask of stoic calm, became unnervingly still. "I found this in the archives," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "It seems like a rather significant decision. I'm just surprised no one thought I deserved to know." "Ilara," my mother began, her voice trembling. "Your father, we were waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded foreign in the warm kitchen. "When would that have been, Mom?" After another year of me working 70-hour weeks? Or were you planning to wait until I was gently phased out and then call it a natural transition? You're being overly dramatic, my father said, his voice low and gruff. I finally looked at him, really looked at him. Dramatic? Dad, don't you dare talk to me about drama when you signed away my entire future without looking me in the eye. Lyra spoke then, her voice a soft whisper. It's not like that, Ellie. You're still a vital part of the company. Vital? I turned to her. I'm the one who managed the company through the 2018 downturn. I'm the one who developed the supplier relationships that have saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm the one who put in the sweat and the tears and the sleepless nights. But the person who inherits it all is the one who came back 6 months ago and thinks a new font is innovation? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Lyra lowered her gaze to her hands. Elara, my father said, his voice stern, trying to regain control. Lyra brings a vision, a creativity that we need. You are reliable. You're practical. But you are not a visionary. I see, I said, the finality of it settling deep in my bones. So a decade of loyalty is just reliability. Building systems that double our profitability is just practical. But a pretty website, that's vision. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My voice dropped, but each word was sharp and clear. I have one question for the three of you. If I hadn't found this binder, would you ever have told me the truth? The silence was my answer. Thank you, I said softly. That's all I needed to know. I picked up the binder, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. This isn't me being emotional. This is me being practical. Effective tomorrow, I am resigning from Vance Heritage Homes. You can't, my mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You're the heart of the company. I looked directly at my father. No, I said, the truth of it finally clear. I was just the foundation. And you've decided to build your new house on sand. Then I turned and walked out the door, away from the smell of my mother's cooking, away from the life I thought was mine, and into the cool, cleansing rain of the Portland night. I thought that walking away would be a clean break, a final, cinematic cut. But life is not a movie. It's a messy, overlapping series of scenes. 3 days after I submitted my formal resignation by email, a brief, professional note with no room for argument, I received a call from Mrs. Gable. Her voice was hushed, as if she were hiding in a closet. Elara, I know you said you were done, but I think you need to see this. Mrs. Gable, I don't work there anymore, I said, my voice tired. It's about the Willow Creek project, she persisted. It directly concerns you. My stomach tightened. Willow Creek. My project. My vision. The one my father had dismissed as too niche. That afternoon, I found myself driving to the office, feeling like a ghost haunting my own past. Mrs. Gable met me at the back entrance, her face etched with worry. She led me to the small viewing room adjacent to the main conference room, its one-way glass looking in on the long mahogany table. Lyra was standing at the head of it, in front of a large projection screen. She was presenting to a group of potential investors. The Willow Creek residences, she began, her voice smooth and confident, represent a new paradigm in community living, blending sustainable architecture with spaces designed to foster genuine human connection. I stopped breathing. Those were my words. My exact words from the proposal I had written months ago. On the screen, my meticulously crafted financial projections, my market analysis, my 4-phase development plan, it was all there. The slides even used the soft green color palette I had chosen to evoke nature and sustainability. It was a perfect, word-for-word, chart-by-chart replica of my work. The only difference was the small, elegant script in the bottom corner of each slide, Lyra Vance, Creative Vision Lead. I stumbled out of the viewing room, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was a different kind of betrayal. It wasn't just about inheritance, it was about theft. The theft of my ideas, my intellect, my very soul. When I got home, I opened my laptop and pulled up my original files. Everything was there, time-stamped, saved on my personal hard drive. The evidence was irrefutable. That night, I called my father. "I need to see you," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Not at the house. Not at the office. Ilara, I don't think this is productive. Tomorrow. 4 o'clock. The daily grind on Division Street. You should be there. Because if you're not, my next call will be to Ms. Albright at Willow Creek, along with their legal team. I'll be sending them my original, time-stamped proposal." The next day, my father walked into the bustling coffee shop looking tired and older than I had ever seen him. I didn't greet him. I just pointed to the chair opposite me and opened my laptop, turning the screen so he could see. On one side was my original Willow Creek file. On the other, a copy of Lyra's presentation deck Mrs. Gable had discreetly emailed me. "What is this, Ilara?" he asked, his voice strained. "This is my work," I said quietly. "And this is my work with my sister's name on it. I want to know how that happened." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Lyra, she took your initial concepts and expanded on them." "No," I said, leaning forward. "She copied them. And you let her. You knew." "It was a strategic decision," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You had the data, but she has the presentation skills. She can sell the vision in a way you can't." I felt a bitter smile touch my lips. "You stole my work, you let her claim it as her own, and you call that a strategy? If this is how you intend to do business, then I hope you have a good lawyer." "You wouldn't do that to your own family," he said, his old confidence returning for a moment. "Wouldn't I?" I slid a small USB drive across the table. "Everything is on here. The files, the emails where you told me to shelve the project, everything. You have 48 hours to remove Lyra's name and issue a formal, written apology to me. After that, this little USB drive goes to Ms. Albright and a few journalists I know who cover the Portland business scene." He stared at the small piece of plastic as if it were a bomb. The authority in his eyes, the authority that had shaped my entire life, was gone. It was replaced by a hollow, defeated look. "What do you want, Ilara?" he finally whispered. I stood up, my hands surprisingly steady. "I want what I've earned. Respect. And you have 2 days to decide if you're capable of giving it. I'm not your dutiful daughter anymore, Dad. I'm not the girl who works in the shadows hoping for a pat on the head. That girl is gone." I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him sitting there with the evidence of his choices between us. I was still shaking, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from the unfamiliar, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling of taking back my own power. For 2 days, the silence was absolute. No calls, no emails. I spent the time walking for hours along the Willamette River, letting the cool, damp air clear my head. On the third morning, a text from Mrs. Gable lit up my phone. "Willow Creek has formally paused their partnership discussions. They're citing a leadership disconnect. Ms. Albright is asking to speak with you directly. Arthur hasn't come into the office. Lyra is in a panic." I sat with that information for a while. The call from Ms. Albright came an hour later. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman I had built a rapport with over many months. "Ilara," she said, her voice crisp. "I need a straight answer. Are you still leading the operational side of Vance Heritage Homes?" "No, Ms. Albright. I've resigned." There was a pause. "I see. I also saw the presentation your sister gave last week. My team and I reviewed our notes from our initial meetings with you. The vision presented was identical to the one you laid out for us 6 months ago. The vision your father told us was not being pursued." "I understand," I said softly. "Then you'll also understand why we've withdrawn our interest. We weren't investing in a brand, Ilara. We were investing in you. Your thoroughness, your integrity. If you're not there, we're not there. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. After we hung up, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The validation I had sought for so long from my family had just been given to me by a near stranger. That evening, my mother called, her voice thick with tears. "Ilara, please. Can you just come back? Everything is falling apart." "No, Mom. We've lost the Willow Creek deal. Your sister, she can't handle this. Your father, he's just sitting in his study. He hasn't said a word all day. The subcontractors are calling, worried about payments." Her voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "Are you just going to let the company your grandfather started crumble to dust?" "I'm not letting anything crumble," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. "You all made a choice. You chose a new leader, a new vision. This is the legacy you handed to Lyra. It's hers to protect now." I ended the call, my heart aching but my resolve firm. The next day, an email from Lyra appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Please. I can't defend what happened," the message read. "I just want to talk. To understand. I'll meet you anywhere, anytime. This isn't about the company. This is about us." I didn't reply immediately. Later that night, while clearing out an old desk drawer, I found a crumpled piece of paper. It was a business plan I'd written when I was 23, full of idealistic, ambitious ideas. In the corner, in my father's familiar red ink, was a single, dismissive word, unrealistic. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Lyra, "Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Riverbend Brews." I didn't know what would come of it, but I knew I wasn't going to save them. If Vance Heritage Homes was to survive, it had to be saved by the person they had chosen. I had finally, truly let go. The morning air at Riverbend Brews was rich with the smell of dark roast coffee and cardamom pastries. The cafe was quiet, a haven from the persistent morning drizzle. Lyra was already there, tucked into a small booth by the window, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of the gray river outside. She stood when I arrived, but I just gave a slight nod and slid into the seat opposite her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I placed my phone face down on the table and waited. "I was wrong," she began, rushing the words out. "The Willow Creek proposal, it wasn't mine. I never should have put my name on it. I was so desperate to prove to Dad, to all of you, that I could be more than just the flighty artist who ran away. I followed his lead, and I was too weak and too proud to say no. Now, everything's a mess. And I understand why." I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air between us. This was her confession, not my absolution to give. She took a shaky breath. "Dad, he wants to ask you to come back." A small, humorless smile touched my lips. "Oh? Because his visionary has run the company into the ground in less than a year?" Lyra flinched. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" I countered, my voice still quiet. "And if he wanted to talk to me, he should have called me himself." She looked down at her untouched latte. I prepared to leave, to finally close this chapter, but her next words made me pause. He said if you'd consider it, he's willing to give you some of his shares." I slowly sat back down. "How much is some?" He suggested 10%. "And the title of Director of Operations." I laughed. It wasn't a bitter sound, but one of genuine, weary amusement. I'm not coming back to be a subordinate in a company I kept alive. I'm not interested in a token title. If the family wants me to salvage this legacy, then the terms will be mine. I pulled a small notebook from my bag and opened it to a clean page. My hand was steady as I wrote. Then I turned it around for her to see. 45% ownership, I said, my gaze locked on hers. The title of Chief Operating Officer. A controlling seat on the board. and complete, unilateral authority over the Willow Creek project and all future developments. Your role will be confined to marketing and aesthetics, with a budget I approve. Lyra stared at the notebook, her eyes wide. 45%. I've dedicated a decade of my life to this company, I said calmly. I navigated it through 2 economic downturns and doubled its value. You've been here for less than a year. If you want me to save what you all broke, you will recognize my worth. Not with praise or promises, but with equity. I'm done working for free. She nodded slowly, a look of dawning understanding on her face. I'll tell him. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my father. Ilara, he said, his voice strained. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Dad, I replied, my voice firm. You can either accept my terms or not. The decision is yours. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his pride warring with his desperation. All right, he finally sighed, the sound of surrender. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Our lawyer's office. I hung up the phone, a deep, quiet strength settling within me. I was no longer the girl hoping for a seat at the table. I was building my own. The next morning, I walked into the lawyer's office wearing a simple, well-tailored navy dress. I felt calm, centered. My father and mother were already there, looking strained. Lyra was not, for which I was grateful. I didn't wait for the pleasantries. I laid my file on the table, a detailed report of my contributions, project successes, and letters of support from our most valued clients and suppliers, including a printed email from Ms. Albright. It was a testament not to my loyalty, but to my value. We've reviewed your terms, the lawyer, a kind-faced man named Mr. Harris, began gently. Your father is prepared to agree. I nodded. I want it signed today. Otherwise, my offer is rescinded. My father looked at me, a flicker of his old, stubborn pride in his eyes. You're pushing this. No, Dad, I said, my voice softening for the first time. I'm just establishing the truth of what's always been. He looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in his gaze. He saw not his little girl, but a woman. A partner. He extended his hand across the table. A new beginning, Ilara. I took his hand. It was a handshake between equals. The agreement was signed. I received 45% of the company. Lyra retained 25%, and my parents the remaining 30%. I was the COO with a controlling vote on the board. I didn't just get my job back. I redefined the entire structure of our world. Walking out of that office, with the signed papers in my briefcase and the cool Portland air on my face, I felt a sense of quiet peace. I hadn't won a battle. I had simply reclaimed myself. The future of Vance Heritage Homes was uncertain, and the path to rebuilding trust with my family would be long and complicated. But for the first time, I felt like the architect of my own life, holding the blueprints to a future I would design myself. The foundation was no longer a promise from someone else, it was the solid ground of my own self-worth, and it was strong enough to hold anything I chose to build upon it. 151, 5S